Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, Leo the Lefty. I'm Leo, and I want to tell you a little bit about my channel before we get started. This is my first video. I'm learning as I go with editing and narrating and my art, obviously. So please be patient with me. I'm doing the best I can, and I've had some hiccups along the way, but I'm really trying to get everything figured out, and I hope as I go I get better. Um, so my channel is going to be art and stories. I'm going to tell you maybe a true crime story or a paranormal story, or maybe it'll be fiction. Who knows? We'll discuss it before each one. And while I do that, I'm going to work on a piece of art for you. This particular piece is something I drew myself. Hopefully you can see it pretty well there. Other times I might work from a coloring book or something I printed off once I get a printer. If I do that, I will definitely credit the artist or the book I get it from, and I will have that written down below in the comments. Also, I will have my sources for my cases and wherever I get my information from, and the art supplies that I'm using. Today it's going to be good old-fashioned crayons, some Bic markers, and maybe some colored pencils. We'll see. The art isn't always going to match up with the story. If I happen to be able to do that, it'll be cool, but it's not something I'm going to pressure myself into doing every time. This is just like a little whimsical gnome tree house. Has nothing to do with the story I'm going to tell you today. What I'm going to tell you today is not whimsical at all. Getting into that, definitely viewer discretion advised. This is not going to be for children. I understand that lots of people let their kids watch YouTube videos. I also do with my kids as well, which they're grown now, so they can watch whatever they want. But this isn't going to be for kids, so please don't let them listen. It's going to be pretty disturbing at some points and very upsetting, and I'm going to have to give a couple of trigger warnings later on, and yeah, your kids don't need to hear this. With that being said, most of the time I'm probably not going to be something you want your kids to listen to. I'm going to give my opinions sometimes. I might let a few cuss words slip now and then. I'm not really trying to watch my language that much. So if you don't want your kids to hear stuff like this, then I would recommend not letting them listen to me. Now, if you're an adult and you're into this kind of thing, let's go. I'm sure, excuse me, you can hear my dog snoring in the background. She is going to probably be a audio fixture in most of my videos, because if I don't have her in the room with me, she screams bloody murder while she claws at the door, and it sounds like a poltergeist she-banshee succubus is trying to break in and murder me. That's not what's happening, but that's what it sounds like is happening. And she makes a wide array of noises. For now it's snoring. Could be something out the other end later. It could be a loud hacking sound. I'll try to edit out what I can, but occasionally, if she does it while I'm talking, obviously we're just gonna have to learn to live with it, people. I have. So hopefully you can too. Hopefully you don't mind. She's a pug, so she makes all the appropriate pug noises. And I have a cat too that also comes in from time to time and wants to make her voice heard, and I listen. So hopefully y'all can excuse the various animal noises you'll hear in the background as we go. Alright, I think that's covered everything. As I said, I'm brand new to this. I'll be honing my skills and upgrading my equipment as I can. The first new thing I want to get is a new camera. I know the quality of this picture isn't as clear as I'd hoped for when I bought it. So hopefully soon I'll be able to get a better camera and have better video for you guys. So I think that covers everything before the case, and we can get into it now. Today is about the unsolved murder of Johnny Gill. This happens in 1888 in Bradford, England, and Johnny Gill is a 7-year-old little boy who lives with his family. His parents are Thomas and Mary Ann Gill, and he's got 2 older sisters, Ruth and Jane, and a younger brother, Samuel. So they're a complete little family. They are poor, but it's said that Mary Ann kept a very clean house, and Thomas worked very hard, and, you know, they got by. So Johnny was born on February 25th, 1881. But our crime is going to take us to December 27th, 1888. Excuse me. Now, the Gill family lives at 41 Thorncliffe Road. I do have a very crudely drawn map that I drew myself from a map online that was made in 1890, so it was the closest I could find to what the area would have looked like at the time. And I will show you that map here in just a little bit whenever it becomes a little more pertinent. So again, the family lives at 41 Thorncliffe Road. I believe this is just a rental home that they live in, and this is not a wealthy side of town by any means. These are, I would say, for the time, lower middle class, very hard-working people just trying to raise their kids and, you know, live their lives quietly. Not a whole lot of crime in this area beyond, like, you know, pickpockets and maybe some burglaries or some theft now and then. Doesn't seem to be anything in the records of anything being super violent or anything like that. But what is going on at the same time, quite a ways away in London, in the Whitechapel area, are the Jack the Ripper murders. These are have been going on for a few months, and people are still all abuzz about them in the paper, and it sort of becomes pertinent information later on. So again, we're at Thursday, December 27th, 1888. It's just a couple days after Christmas. All the Gill children are home on winter break, so they're not in school right now. They normally would be if it weren't for the break. So it's about 7:20 in the morning at the Gill home, and Thomas is getting ready to go to work. Mary Ann is up with the kids. She's fixing some breakfast, and they are waiting for a gentleman named William Barrett, who is the local milkman, to come and pick Johnny up. Johnny likes to go on the morning delivery route with Barrett. So a little bit about Barrett. He is a 23-year-old man. He's been married about a year, and he has an infant daughter at home. His wife's name is Margaret, and his daughter's name is Nellie, I believe I saw in a source. So they have been letting Johnny go on Barrett with his milk runs throughout the morning. Now, it didn't say in the sources if he did this every morning, even when he had school, or if this was just something that specifically happened because he had no school. But Barrett had not been the milkman long, only a couple of months. He was new to town, and he had made a lot of friends. People really liked him. They thought he was hardworking, a sober, good, honest guy. He had moved prior to living in Bradford, he lived in Canonnelly, and there he had been a Sunday school teacher, so, he liked kids, kids liked him, and he had developed a friendship with Johnny, and he had started going on these morning milk deliveries with Barrett, and they took about an hour. He would leave the house a little after 7:20 or so and be home around 8:30, and he seemed to enjoy it, and his parents didn't mind. So that's what was going on this morning. They're waiting around for Barrett, and he does arrive at his usual time, which is between 7:20 and 7:30, and Thomas says goodbye to Johnny. Marianne bundles him up in his jacket and sends him out the door, and she will see him in about an hour, and he'll have a nice hot breakfast waiting on him. Marianne, she's a good mom. She loves her babies, all of them, and she does the best she can to take care of them. So she's expecting Johnny home at about 8:30, but 8:30 comes along and Johnny still isn't home, and initially she doesn't really think too much of it. She thinks, okay, well, he'll be along in a few minutes. But it gets to the point where she's confused about where he could be. She keeps looking out the windows and the doors to see if he's going to be walking up the street any second, as he should be, because by now it's getting to be about 9 o'clock and he's still not home, which is weird. He should be home. She really can't imagine what would have kept him longer than this, but she keeps herself busy doing chores around the house and whatnot. 9 o'clock, 9:30, 10 o'clock, 10:30. Now, Johnny's older sister Ruth she was 13, and she had herself a factory job where she worked a couple hours a morning. And she normally would work a couple hours in the morning in the factory and then go to school, but they're on winter break, as I said, so she isn't going to school afterwards. She's going home, and she is glad. She wants to rest and lay around and hang out with her sister. And she notices that her mom is fretting over Johnny being gone, and not home yet, and she thinks that her mom is overreacting. She thinks that Johnny's just out playing somewhere and he'll be along shortly. No big deal, Mom. Calm down. That sort of thing. Ruth is about 13, so, she's not a mother and she's not concerned yet. But by about 11, Johnny still isn't home. So Marianne sends Ruth out to go look for him. Ruth, begrudgingly, leaving the warmth and comfort of home, goes back out onto the streets to search for her brother. And, now she's irritated because she's had to take time out of the rest of her day off to go track him down. And she is going to places she knows the other boys like to play, and she's finding the boys he would be playing with if he were out playing. And Johnny's not with them, and they haven't seen Johnny since that morning, if they've seen him at all that day. Keep in mind, some of these kids might not have been out as early as Johnny was, since there's no school. So she gets home probably sometime after 12:30 to 1 o'clock, something like that. She cannot find Johnny. She tells her mom, can't find him, looked everywhere, knocked on some doors, talked to some people. Nobody's seen him since this morning, or they haven't seen him at all. So, Marianne is getting pretty worried by now. She's very concerned. At first she was irritated that he had Probably lost track of time, but now she's getting kind of worried. He'd never done this before. It wasn't like him at all. So she decides that she is going to go to Barrett's house, which is just around the corner, and see if she can, talk to him or whomever to see uh, where's Johnny? What's the holdup? Let me finish coloring in this little window here, and then I will pull out my map to show you um, just how close their houses were to each other, because she literally, Marianne, her house is right around the corner from Barrett's, and this is all going to come into play later. And there goes my dog sounding off again, as she is wont to do. Okay, let's take a look at the map real quick. So, as you can see, very crudely drawn. This was just from a small section of a map I could find on the internet. So, this is Thorncliffe Road. This is the road that Johnny lives on, probably somewhere on this end of the corner of Bateman Street, or Bateman Road and Thorncliffe Road. So, the Gill family is here, and somewhere on this stretch is the Barrett family. So, it's just a minute or so, and Marianne can be at their house. So she goes to the Barrett home. William Barrett's not there. His wife Margaret is. And she tells Marianne that she saw Johnny that morning when he came home with Barrett at breakfast. But when Barrett came home at noon for lunch, Johnny wasn't with him. And that's all she knows. So Marianne does think this is strange. He's never gone to Barrett's house for breakfast before. She doesn't know why he did it today. Doesn't seem like Margaret knows why, or if she does, she's not saying. So she goes, she leaves Margaret's house, and she goes looking, Marianne does, for Barrett. She wants to talk to him herself. And so she's going to come down this way, and the Bellevue stables are somewhere along here. It doesn't exactly say, but they're in this vicinity somewhere. So the map online, it literally cut off right here. I don't know what is down here other than some houses, and we know that for sure for reasons that will become clear later. But anyway, so Marianne leaves the Barrett home, comes down here, she probably cuts through, and comes down to Bellevue. When she arrives at the Bellevue stable, she sees Barrett talking to his boss, Mr. Wolfenden. Mr. Wolfenden is the owner of the dairy, and he has employed Barrett. So Barrett, this is not the first time Barrett would work for Wolfenden. Previously, in the town he lived in, Connolly, I believe, Barrett had worked at one of Wolfenden's farms as a farm laborer. It's unclear why he now moved to Bradford and becomes a milkman. Maybe it was a better job offer. I don't know. We'll get into Wolfenden later. But so what happens is Marianne approaches them. They see her. Wolfenden just goes back inside, but Barrett, who I guess was cleaning milk cans before, just goes back to cleaning the milk cans. He doesn't acknowledge Marianne. He doesn't ask her why she's there. He doesn't say anything. She has to go up to him and ask him, hey, where's Johnny? Have you seen him? And he is going to tell Marianne that Johnny left him at about 8:30, right before his last delivery, that he went to go play with some other kids, and he hasn't seen him since. Again, Marianne finds this very weird. Why would Johnny leave him right before the last delivery at Walmer Villas? Walmer Villas are up here, so Barrett had a delivery somewhere up here in this vicinity, and Johnny left him right before the last house and went off to go play. That's what Barrett is saying at this current moment. And he's not stopping what he's doing when he's doing this. He's he just continues washing the milk cans. He won't make eye contact with Marianne. He won't look at her. He's not offering any additional information. He just says he went to go play with friends at 8:30 before my last delivery. I don't know where he is. This doesn't sit well with Marianne, of course. She is quite upset that he can't give her more information than that, which I don't blame her. But she really can't get any more out of him, so she decides she's going to go continue looking and searching around for him, that if he really did go off with some friends, maybe she'll find him. And she looks around for a couple of hours and, doesn't find him. She's asking around and talking to people, and nobody's seen him since earlier that morning with Barrett. And she is getting very, very worried at this point. So at another point, she does go home in a little while, just in case Johnny has come home, which he hasn't. But while she's there, this is going to be about 3 o'clock probably in the afternoon. Barrett will stop by and ask if Johnny's come home yet. And she tells him no. She asks him, did he say something to upset Johnny and Johnny ran off? And Barrett says no. And then she says, did Johnny say something to upset Barrett? And he just kind of, no. And once he knows that Johnny hasn't come home yet, he just puts his hat back on and he walks off. And this is something he's going to do quite often over the next couple of days. He's going to show up and he's going to ask if Johnny is home. When he's told he's not home, then he's going to just walk away. He's going to be very unhelpful. And so by about 5 o'clock Thursday, Marianne has had enough, and she knows it's time to tell Thomas what's going on. So she sends her daughters, Ruth and Jane, to go find Thomas at work and let him know what's happening. Now, initially, Thomas isn't really that worried. I'm going to use this marker. He thinks that Johnny's just run off to play and lost track of time. And, he'll have a perfectly good explanation for it and all will be fine. But, this is 5 o'clock in the evening in December. It's dark by now. Johnny, if he really did go to breakfast with Barrett, then he's only eaten breakfast and he's probably, starving by now and cold and everything. It's December in England. Of course it's cold outside. And it just isn't like him to not come straight home like he always did, but to be out this long and late was just unlike Johnny. So the girls find Thomas and tell him, and he's not that worried, but he decides before he goes home he's gonna go look for Johnny and for Barrett, because he knows Barrett took him out for the milk run. He knows from the girls that Johnny never came back from the milk run, so on and so forth. So he spends a little while looking for Barrett and he doesn't find him. He's looking for Johnny. He doesn't find him. Eventually he does find Barrett. I believe he finds him not at work, just kind of out and about in the evening. By then it's probably like 6:30 or 7, and Barrett tells Thomas the same thing. Haven't seen him since this morning when he left me before the last house to go play with friends. So then Thomas finally goes home and he's talking to Marianne, and Marianne is telling him, I don't believe Barrett, something is wrong. And he's still trying to keep her from freaking out, so he's trying to be the calm one. Even though he knows something is wrong, he's trying to help her by telling her, you know, everything's okay, we'll figure it out, I'm sure Johnny's fine, yada yada. But he's worried. And, you know, Thomas Gill is a stoic man. He doesn't really wear his emotions on his sleeve, so it takes a little while for him to accept that this is going on and that, you know, he needs to be worried. But once he does let that set in that he needs to be worried, you know, it's about 8 o'clock and there's a knock at the door, and it's Barrett once again asking if Johnny's come home yet. So, you know, we know he came by earlier between like 3 and 5, and now he's come by again, and they tell him no, and they're trying to ask him more questions. He's not answering any of these questions. As soon as he finds out that Johnny isn't home, he just walks away and puts his hat back on and leaves. And so all of Thursday night, Thomas Gill and friends and neighbors, everyone else in the neighborhood, older children, are all out looking for Johnny. Everybody's out looking for Johnny while Marianne is at home with her children, just in case Johnny comes home. Johnny does not come home, and they, you know, don't find any trace of him while they're out searching the streets at night. There's nobody else is reporting seeing Johnny after 10 a.m. Sorry, I need a drink of water. So after 10 a.m., nobody reports seeing Johnny, and it's very strange. But the Gills are going to look all night long, and of course they find nothing. And that brings us into Friday morning. So Friday morning, about 7:20, here comes Barrett knocking on their door. Has Johnny come home? No, he hasn't. Okay. And Barrett goes off to work. And the Gill family continues looking for Johnny. And they did tell the police. What you have to understand about this time is the police were not like they are today. They're not going to call out all the resources for a missing child. They were just like, you know, okay, we'll keep an eye out for him if we happen to. But also at this time, there's a lot of children without parents or without homes also running around on the streets. And, you know, it's hard to tell, like, hey, is that Johnny Gill, or is that just a child that lives on the streets? Who knows, you know? But the police aren't worried. They don't know who Johnny Gill is. They think, oh, he ran off to play, he'll come home when he's ready. Because that's what they always say, and they're always wrong. So I don't know why they keep saying it, but they should stop. We're getting a little better about it, but even still, as soon as there's that, you know, the word runaway is thrown in there, they just quit looking. Which I'm just like, you know, doesn't matter whether they ran away or not. If they're minors, go get them. That's terrible. But this is 1888. You know, we're barely doing better in 1988. 100 years later, we weren't much better with missing children. But in 1888, certainly the cops are not going to search the city or anything like that for a missing 7-year-old boy. They're just not going to do that. They'll keep an eye out for him, but that's probably all they're going to do. And, you know, who knows, after they tell the police about Johnny missing, how many other police were even bothered to be told at the station that there was a missing boy. You know, it's very unclear. It didn't spur an investigation, that's for sure. So they spend all day Friday, all day looking for Johnny. He is nowhere to be found. Barrett is going to stop by a couple more times during the afternoon and the evening to ask if Johnny is home. He's going to get his no answer, and then he's going to just be on his way. Let me find the right brown. I want a brownie brown for this. That's too light. Yeah, I guess we'll go back to that one. That'll work. Okay. So, there's still no trace of Johnny by Friday. Certainly during the day. And once again, Friday night, Thomas is walking the streets looking for his son. He's got people helping. Barrett is never one of those people. Never ever at any point while Johnny is missing does Barrett offer to go look for him. This little boy that was supposedly his friend, he is not concerned enough about to help go look for him, which tells me quite a bit, but you know, we'll get back to that later. So they're still not finding him. They're looking in, you know, places where they thought, oh, he might have fell and had an accident and things like that. They're looking in alleyways and trash bins and ditches and gutters and everywhere they can, but they're just not finding little Johnny anywhere. He's basically nowhere to be found at this point. And, you know, the day goes by and it gets dark and it's, you know, late Friday night. So again, like I said, Thomas Gill is out looking for Johnny with some people. Barrett is never one of those people helping. So this next part, once I get caught up in my notes again, I did it again. I've told this story so many times on film that now I have it down by heart. So this next part is going to be like sort of it's going to be a timeline of the late evening hours of Friday and the early morning hours of Saturday. We'll get into some other details about early morning hours of Saturday later on, but for now, this is going to be what some people heard and or saw Friday night. We're going to start with Police Constable Arthur Kirk. Now, he is the officer on duty to walk this route that night. He's a beat cop, and basically he has a route he has to walk where he's going to be, you know, checking certain points every couple of hours and marking down, making notes of anything, and just making sure everybody is safe and all is quiet and well. Okay, we're going to start our evening off at 10:25. That is when Police Constable Kirk is making his rounds. It takes him through the Thorncliffe neighborhood, down these other streets, these alleyways. All of these have alleyways, but I've only marked the one on Mellor Street because it's the one that's important for the story. This is Mellor Street. There's a butcher shop here. There are stables back here, and there are coach house doors back here. And PC Kirk is going to come through every couple of hours. He's going to check these coach house doors, make sure they're locked every time, and he's going to note it in his notebook. So at 10:25, he starts there. He notes it. They're locked. Everything is good, and he goes about his way. At 10:45, a draper named Benjamin Abbott is leaving his shop. It doesn't say where his shop is, but his route takes him down here, down Bellevue. And as he's going down that route, he notices a light on at the stables in Bellevue. The only reason he notices is because he's never seen a light on that late there before, and he does think it's a little strange, but he doesn't do anything about it. He doesn't investigate further. He just heads home. At 11:45, Richard Manuel, a butcher, was leaving a billiards club that was located somewhere on Manningham Lane. It didn't say where, doesn't matter. His route home takes him down Bellevue as well. So, as he's going down Bellevue, he notices a man at the stables is holding the door open with his left hand. Same as before, Abbott, he doesn't investigate. Well, neither does Richard Manuel. He's just trying to get home before midnight so his wife isn't angry with him. At 12:45, P.C. Kirk is back at the coach house doors. They are locked. Everything is fine. Now, between 1 and 3, a woman that lived on houses here, that her bedroom window faced the stables. We don't know exactly where, but she must have been directly across from the stables across the street. Between 1 and 3, Miss Eliza Jane Kendall is woken in her bedroom. At first, she thinks someone's trying to break into her home. As she listens for a minute, she realizes the sounds are coming from the stables across the street. They are like, she doesn't know if it is sawing or scrubbing or what, but there's some sort of like repetitive friction type noise that she hears. She hears this for quite a while. She's dozing on and off, and certain things are waking her up, so she keeps hearing noises. At some point, she hears a door shut at the stables, and then she hears footsteps headed towards Manningham Lane. At 2:25, P.C. Kirk is back at the coach house doors. All is well. At 4:35, Kirk does his final check at the coach house doors. All is well. Okay, so this is going to get us to about 7 a.m. Saturday morning, and I'm going to take a drink of water before we get into that. And my pug is going to snore before we get into that. So around 7 a.m. on Saturday morning, this is the 29th of December, a young man named Joseph Burke is working at the butcher shop on Mellor Street here. One of his jobs is to go around and muck the stables in the back. Muck means shovel the shit and do whatever with it. And he's going to go do that. It's 7, so the sun is coming up, but it's not quite all the way up yet. It's still a little dark. So as he's coming into the alleyway, he notices a bundle of something on the ground in front of the coach house doors. It's a bundle of clothing, it looks like. And so he gets closer to investigate. And we are done with the map for a little bit. When he sees what he sees, it will send him into the streets screaming to everyone that Jack the Ripper is here. This poor kid was scared out of his damn mind by what he saw. And here in a little bit, when I tell you what he saw, you'll know why. It's awful. Poor Joseph. Poor dude. You know, he would later tell the newspapers that he can't stop seeing it every time he closes his eyes, and you know, it's horrific, which of course it is. Anyway, so a little after 7, a crowd is starting to form around the alley at Mellor Street. Now, in one of my sources, it says that Ruth is on her way to work at the factory again. That's Johnny's older sister, and that as she sees the crowd, another of the girls she works with tells her that it is her brother Johnny. Now, so the thing with this book is it does use accurate sources. It does use actual court testimony and police reports and all of that. But something else that it does is it kind of fills in the human element. And I like this. It gives it a very, you know, like, touching perspective on it. It's not just a clinical, dry read. It's very emotional and everything. And so I don't know if this actually happened or if it was done for dramatic effect, but one of the girls that Ruth works with tells her that it's Johnny, that they found Johnny's body. And Ruth is upset by this, of course, and she goes, I guess, to another woman in the crowd that tells her, no, it's a much older boy, about 17 or 18. And then Ruth is, wanting to believe it's not Johnny and that that's true, and she is appeased by this, and I guess she either goes on to work or goes home. I'm not sure. I don't know if that actually happened, but what we do know is that not not long after Joseph made his discovery, a crowd had formed in the alleyway out onto the street, and it wouldn't be long before they would determine the body to be that of Johnny Gill, and that the Gill family would soon learn that yes, Johnny had been found. He was not alive. And it probably felt like in the moment it couldn't get worse than that, but unfortunately it will. So, this is where we're getting very close to the part where I'm going to read the coroner's report to you about what happened to the body. It's listener discretion advised, trigger warning for child death and sexual assault and body mutilation and dismemberment. This is rough stuff. It's horrible, and it takes me about 2 minutes or so to get through, so you can skip it. I'm sorry. I'm gonna read it just because it's part of the story and why this crime was so horrible. But also, there are a lot of people that believe it was Jack the Ripper then and now, and in order to discuss why I don't think it was Jack the Ripper, we need these details. So, and quite frankly, if you are listening to this, then you're probably okay with this sort of stuff. I mean, not like you're okay with it, but you can hear it without it doing too much trauma to you. So, I will get into that. Like I said, trigger warning, takes me about 2 minutes to get through all this. So if you want to skip ahead, we can start doing that now. So, the body is taken to the morgue, and the coroner is going to do his exam, and these are going to be his findings. So the arms and legs had been crudely chopped off of the body, close to the body. The limbs were tied to the trunk with a brace. It never says what it means by brace. I imagine they mean like a wooden board or possibly a wooden dowel of some sort, but there's going to be 2 of these braces that are holding the body or the limbs to the body. Okay, this is terrible, but this is Henry. This is my little buddy here. So it seems like the legs and the arms were dismembered, but they were tied together and stuck to the torso of the body. Okay? Thank you, Henry, for your valiant demonstration. Appreciate you, bud. So the limbs are tied to the braces, which are then tied around the neck and to the trunk just below the leg stumps. All of the blood had been drained from the body. There was no blood at the scene where the body was found. That was all clear. And it appeared that the trunk, the body, whatever, had been rinsed out. Both of his ears were cut off. His shirt sleeve, one sleeve was knotted tightly around his neck, and the other sleeve was tied around the lower trunk just above the leg stumps. The body was eviscerated with a cut starting under the chin and going all the way to the pubic area. The intestines had been pulled out and wrapped around the neck. Now, this is something that was similar in the one of, at least anyway, the Jack the Ripper cases, that the intestines and the innards had kind of been pulled out and wrapped around and displayed for like shock value. I think that could have been read in the paper and definitely could have been copied, but a lot of people want to point to that and say that's what proves it was Jack the Ripper. I think it was just, it was either copied or just not coincidence. I do not think Jack the Ripper did this, and I don't think that, there's any relevance other than perhaps the killer of Johnny was an admirer of the crimes and had been reading them in the paper because they were so prevalent at the time. Johnny's heart had been ripped out, not cut out, but ripped out and placed under the chin. In the chest, there were 2 stab wounds, which they do believe these were the cause of death. They believe that Johnny was probably sexually assaulted, and then these 2 stab wounds, and then all the mutilation came afterwards. The lungs were missing as well. So, like his ears, they didn't find his lungs. They didn't find any of the cut away body parts that weren't tied to the body or whatever. What they did find in his chest cavity were his boots. His penis and anus were both carved out, is the words they used in the coroner's report. So that sounds, it sounds horrific, but clinically it sounds somebody very unskilled, just like the ripping out of the heart instead of the cutting out. So that just sounds like somebody who's unskilled and unfamiliar with anatomy to me. There were no knife marks in his clothing, so they believe he was nude or at least shirtless before he was stabbed, which makes sense if he had been assaulted. And then the remains of the body were all wrapped in his own clothing, which was, by all accounts, every piece of clothing was there except for, it was either a sock or both socks, I can't remember, and I didn't write it down. See, people, I'm learning, gonna have to do better with my research. Anyway, so that is the coroner's report. There was no blood at the scene, of course, as we said. The only blood is there was a little bit on the rim of his hat. So that is the only blood they found. So it definitely implies that his clothes were off and far away from him when he was being drained of blood, because they didn't have any blood spatter or anything like that on them. And that concludes the coroner's report. So that is the most gruesome and kind of worst part of it that is over. Okay, so that wraps up the coroner's report and, pretty much the worst part of what we're going to have to listen to for that. So now that the police knew for a fact a crime had been committed, they did go and pick up William Barrett from his home and take him into custody. They would bring him to the police station to excuse me, they would bring him to the police station to question him, and while they would do that, they were going to search his home and speak to his wife, and also search the Bellevue stables, and they're also looking for, around the area to see if there's any other evidence they can find. So they haul Willie in that day, and here in just a minute we'll go through what Willie says, but Police Constable Withers is the lead investigator on the case, and they've held him in custody for a little while they have been gathering some evidence to question Barrett about. So, he waited in custody for a little while, I believe, because it seems like they've kind of already got a general story that they know about before they question Barrett and can intervene with some other questions and things like that ahead of time. Now, I think I'm going to do a bit of a red to make the door stand out. It's kind of plain, and I think redwood is really cool, and I like red doors. So they're going to question Barrett, and he's going to give the following timeline for Thursday morning when he, was with Johnny and before Johnny goes missing. He says that he wakes up at about 6 that morning, and by 6:30 he is at the dairy getting the milk cart ready to meet the milk train to get his first delivery of milk, and so that way he can do his morning deliveries. He has to, fill the milk cans and get the horses hitched up to the milk cart and everything like that. And then by 7:20 he was picking Johnny up from his house. He says he goes about his regular route, and right before the last house, Johnny wants to go play with friends, so he leaves Barrett behind and runs along to go play with his friends. And they have already spoken to some other witnesses that put Johnny with him a little later in the morning, and so they tell him at this point, like, hey, we know some other people saw you with Johnny as late as like 9:30, 10 o'clock. And Barrett backtracks a little bit, and he says, oh, well, maybe they saw me with him as late as 9:30, but definitely no later than 9:30. And so they keep questioning him. Some of the evidence they had gathered from his house, they were about to present to him, which were 3 knives they confiscated from his kitchen, 2 just kitchen knives, and 1 was a bread knife. And they took the bread knife thinking it was about the right size for the wounds in Johnny's chest. I don't know about this. To me, I don't think he used any of his wife's kitchen knives, and I definitely don't think he used a bread knife, but maybe he did. So whenever they put the knife in front of him, he says he doesn't recognize it, which is kind of weird that he doesn't recognize his own bread knife, but also maybe not that weird. If his wife did all of the cooking and serving, he may not have used the bread knife. She probably cut the bread and then plated up his food and gave it to him. So I don't know, but you'd think he'd recognize his own bread knife, but it's quite possibly not that weird if he didn't. Moving on, they found some damp clothing of Barrett's, and when they asked Margaret if she had recently washed it, she said she couldn't remember. That to me does sound strange. I feel like any time back then when you're doing laundry, it is a monotonous, tedious, hard, drawn-out process. It isn't easy as throwing it in a machine and walking away. They probably weren't wealthy enough to have like a laundry service or anything, so she probably washed the clothing, and she said she couldn't remember. So keep in mind, the clothing is supposedly the clothing that Barrett wore on Thursday, and this is Saturday when the police are discovering it, and it is still damp. So if she had done laundry on Thursday or Friday, she would have remembered, because for those clothes to still be damp a couple of days later, doesn't add up. And Barrett is going to say that he got caught in the rain, and that's why the clothes are wet. He says this, but, and we'll discuss it again later, it did not rain on Thursday. So, he's kind of going back and forth with the police about his whereabouts and everything like that. He says that, you know, Johnny left him at no later than 9:30. And then he continues to say that by 9 to 9:30 he is back at the dairy, and he's going to work there for a couple of hours, doing things around the dairy, working at the cream processor and churning butter and things like that. And then around 11 he's going to make his second round of morning deliveries. So that's what he's telling the police so far. Flip my notes here. After finishing the deliveries, he says he goes back to the dairy and he's working there until around 5:40, and that's because at 6 he has to go and get the evening milk train to get the milk delivery for his evening deliveries. So he will meet the milk train about 5:40 and, you know, fill his cans and go make his evening deliveries around 6. He'll finish up that. I imagine he finishes around 7, and then he goes back to the dairy. He works until 8 p.m. and then he goes home. The problem is, while they're questioning him, they've also questioned Margaret, and she says that yes, normally Barrett is home by 8, but on that particular night he didn't get home until after 10:35, and he had told her he had to work late. So they question him about this, and there are certain things when Barrett doesn't have like a ready answer, he just won't answer at all. And this is one of those points where he kind of just puts his head down and stares at the floor, and he's not interested in answering at all. So later that afternoon, about 4 o'clock Saturday afternoon, they're going to have like a pre-trial hearing to see if they can remand Barrett in custody while they continue to conduct their investigation. And he doesn't have legal representation at this point, so the police constable Withers testifies, and Johnny's parents, and a few other people with what they know so far, and the magistrates agree that yes, Barrett can be held and remand in custody for a while they continue the investigation. So Saturday night, after court and everything, the first person to go see Barrett in jail is Mr. Wolfenden, his boss. And he tells Barrett that he's going to pay for a lawyer. He's going to get him a legal defense, not to worry, all that. Which is weird. It is just weird. I mean, okay, maybe Wolfenden truly believed in Barrett's innocence, but even if he did, it was not a common thing for people to really help out with money. Wealthier people to help out their employees with money and things like that. And so it really speaks volumes to me that Mr. Wolfenden did this. And I don't know, it's kind of sort of touched on in other sources that people think it's weird too, but nobody really talks about it that much. I think there's something weird going on with Wolfenden, if I'm being 100% honest. I think that's strange thing for him to do, and he's done other strange things, and we'll get into those. But Mr. Wolfenden seems to come into this story a lot for somebody who's basically just a side character. And after he leaves, you know, the jailhouse, the courthouse, the police station, the Gill home, all of these places have just reporters everywhere, swarming. So, ooh, sorry about that. My mic kind of hit a whistle there. So the reporters are swarming, and Margaret is happy to give them a statement that her husband is, of course, not guilty. This is all a misunderstanding. They will prove his innocence and he will be released. She's, you know, very confident with the reporters about all of that. So, you know, she gives her statement, and this is kind of the beginning of when it's going to be a circus, a media circus, for the next few weeks in Bradford because of all of this. There's going to be a strange groundswell of support in Barrett's innocence. You know, there's a few people that think he's guilty. The town's pretty divided on it, but there's a lot more than you would expect that believe in his innocence. He had quite a little following of loyal followers, I guess you would say. It's very weird. But nobody could believe Barrett could do such a thing because he loved children so much. Oh my God, he loves them. It's not weird at all that he gives them candy and money. Just, that's where we're going, folks. Sorry. I'm going to take you on a journey. You know what? I think I'm going to give these a cute little border first. So, you know, for now, Willie is in custody. The investigation is continuing. The Gills now know for sure that Johnny is dead, and that he was murdered. It wasn't an accident or anything like that. He was definitely murdered. The next few days are going to be chaotic. You know, like I said, the town is going to fill up with press. The Gill family is just waiting to get Johnny's body back so that they can bury him and say their goodbyes. And, you know, they're still grieving, but they're also hearing more and more details about what happened to Johnny, and it just gets more vile and more horrific the more they have to hear. You know, I really feel so sorry for them. This must have been just agony for both of them to hear what was done. And, sorry, I'm checking my notes and making sure I'm keeping up. So we've gotten through his timeline. Yeah. I promise I'll get better at this, everybody. I really do. Alright, so what's going to happen over the next couple of weeks is, like I said, the media is going to go crazy, but there's also going to be the investigation and 2 separate inquests. There will be the coroner's inquest and the criminal inquest. The coroner's inquest is going to center around Johnny, his remains, and what happened to him. The criminal inquest is going to center around Barrett and the evidence pointing whether or not he did or didn't do this. So those are going to run consecutively, and they're both going to pretty much run on the same evidence and everything, but that's going to be happening simultaneously. And Wolfenden will secure a lawyer for Barrett. His name is John Whip Craven, and he is quite a man, is what we'll say. He's the son of a magistrate, so it means His father was also a lawyer, and then he became a magistrate, which is a judge, essentially. So he has, I guess, quite a reputation to live up to and whatnot. Um, he is very brash and loves talking to the press. He loves making statements and, accusing others and all of that. He just eats it up. He's a very flashy lawyer. I guess is what we would call him today. But he's going to essentially start a campaign against the police using the press by giving statements often, and the police are going to be made to look as if they're not doing a good job on this investigation. But to be fair to them, and you'll hear in other cases where I'll call a bad investigation out when I see it. But in this case, I don't think it was a bad investigation. I think that Barrett had a good legal strategist behind him and had the press and just a lot of luck and a lot of wealthy backers. It was weird. It's very strange how everybody kind of huddled around Barrett to make him feel supported and everything. And the same was not given to the Gill family, unfortunately. They had some close people that knew them that, really believed that also that Barrett had done this and everything, but Barrett he was one of those guys who just all of a sudden became super popular, super well liked, and everybody decided that he couldn't possibly have done this and they would support him. And Johnny's case kind of almost got lost because of this. It wasn't about him anymore, almost. It was about Barrett. And it's really unfortunate that even today cases can go like that, where the victim takes a back seat to the perpetrator or, defendant's fame or whatever. And that hurts everybody, unfortunately. Alright, so they are going to have several different small trials for each inquest. We're going to hear a lot of the same people testify, a lot of the same evidence and things like that. But the first one, after Craven is hired to be Barrett's representation, legal representation, they will hold a trial. It's not a long one. They call up the same people as they did in the first one, and a few more people and experts that they've hired, and because of things they've learned along the way and everything like that. So it's a lot of these little trials are going to be the same thing over and over. So we'll get into that because it kind of jumps around on the timeline a little bit and can be a bit confusing, but I'll try to lay it out the best I can. I'm just trying to get these little dots colored in before I start reading the court testimony because it has to go in a certain order. Okay, so the next few days are going to be pretty crazy. Like I said, the investigations, hearings and things like that. And finally, on Friday, January 4th of 1889, 6 days after Johnny's body was discovered and 8 days after he'd gone missing, his body was returned to his family, and they could finally have a funeral for little Johnny. And so they did that Friday. Hundreds of people came out, and there were a lot of them that were close with the family, but there were a lot of them that were just there to, kind of gawk and stare, unfortunately. But it was a very somber affair. Lots of people had sent flowers and wreaths from all over the country, and, at least they were able to give him that much of a burial, a very dignified funeral, it sounds like. Very somber, and although I'm sure there was plenty of media there, it didn't seem like anyone caused like a spectacle or anything. It seemed to be mostly a respectful funeral, thank goodness. So, they have the funeral finally. Poor Johnny's family is able to lay him to rest. Of course, Marianne was a wreck during this. She cried and, you know, fell onto the coffin a few times crying. Poor woman. It was very, very sad affair. So, um, everybody who attended said that it was, quite sad, quite cold, and all of that. Let's see here. So now we're going to skip to January 9th, which is a Wednesday. And they're going to be holding another trial. This is a part of the criminal inquest. And they're once again having pretty much the same people testify about what they've witnessed. They're having the same experts come in, only one of the experts, he's gotten some results back on some of his testing. His name is Remington, and he was an analyst hired by the police, and he tested some damp rags that were believed to have blood on them that were found in the Bellevue stables underneath a stack of hay. There was a big sheet of canvas that was also found that appeared to have blood on it. So he tested that, and then he tested a knife, a hatchet, and a hammer. So the rags and the canvas came back inconclusive, and the knife, the hammer, and the hatchet came back as negative. Like they did not contain any human blood. So that was kind of a blow to the constable's case there. He was really hinging on that being part of the evidence of what was used in the stables to dismember Johnny. And maybe it just wasn't the right tools and stuff that were used. It does seem strange that the rags were hidden under the hay, but also you have to take into account, again, this is 1888, so perhaps the methods of testing weren't as sound, and if we could retest them today, who knows what it would show. They did also test some blood on one of Barrett's shirts. He said he cut himself shaving and that it was his blood. There's never any mention as to how big the blood stain is, how much is there, all that, yada yada. So that's not, confirmed evidence either. Excuse me. So, Remington is going to testify that, what he's tested has come back either inconclusive or negative, and that's going to be a major hit to the prosecution's case. one of the doctors who looked at Johnny's body afterwards will also testify that there were contents of Johnny's stomach were currants, and on Saturday, while they were searching Barrett's home, there was part of a currant cake in his kitchen. So, you know, that's a strike for the prosecution, you know. But really, that's about it as far as the physical evidence they had, and they couldn't specifically prove either that, you know, those currants came from that currant cake. It was just a more circumstantial evidence that can't really be proved, you know. So they had to kind of, they could throw it out there, but it didn't really mean anything to, well, at least to the defense and everything. But of course, they hoped to the magistrates it wouldn't either. Coloring in the little mushrooms here. So all of this would bring everything to a close, and the magistrates would talk for a bit, and they would come back with a judgment of no prima facie, which means there's not sufficient evidence to get a guilty verdict, and so they are not going to pursue any further charges at this time, and Barrett is a free man. Yes, Barrett gets to leave the courtroom a free man, and boy, are people so happy for him. He's got people waiting outside to shake his hand and hug him and all of that, and the poor Gill family is just left broken. But it's not over yet. The coroner's inquest is still ongoing. They're still investigating, and they are still collecting evidence, and that will be held in front of a group of magistrates that will be different. So there's still hope, but it's not looking good for those who believe that Barrett is guilty. But the investigation goes on. So over the next few weeks, Barrett will move out of Bradford, and he will move back to Connolly, and he'll move in with his parents, with his wife and daughter, and they'll all live in his parents' house for a little while. While the investigation continues. So I guess the hubbub had kind of calmed down around the Gill home, since they weren't speaking to the press or anything, but around the rest of town, I mean, it was still a media frenzy, and everybody was still trying to get the latest scoop on the latest stories and things such as that. So there was still a lot going on, and a lot of rumors being spread, a lot of investigating going on. And you know, they did things like the police did things like pulling up the drains and searching the drains in the Bellevue stables to look for blood and tissue and hair. Now, they wouldn't find anything they could use, but it just shows you that they really, really were doing the absolute most they could. Poor Constable Withers, he was really trying. He really wanted to solve this case and prove it, and you know, he truly believed Barrett did it. I'm going to say right now, I also believe Barrett did it. So, you know, it's frustrating to see Barrett going free after this horrible thing happened, and everybody supporting Barrett. I mean, I imagine it was just so hurtful to see all that support in the media, um, for Johnny's poor family. You know, their little boy is gone, and the man who they are sure did it is getting, like, the royal treatment, essentially. It must have been very unfair for them. It's just heartbreaking. Poor little Johnny. Sweet little boy was just taken out like that. Okay, trying to decide what color we will do these mushrooms. What color should we do these mushrooms? So Barrett's out now. He's a free man, and we still have the coroner's inquest going on. And they would be ready to meet in trial around January 18th. The trial would start on January 18th and go on for a little over 2 weeks. There's going to be a lot of witness testimony. This is where I'm going to tell you about some of the witness testimony. Sorry, I'm trying to scoot my chair in because I'm about to do the mushrooms here. We'll talk about the witness testimony here because this is going to lay out the timeline for the wee hours of Saturday morning, which is very important because some people saw some things. And this is what I was waiting to tell you. And we'll get to that. Like I said, wee hours of late hours of Friday night, early hours of Saturday morning. So, earlier I told you that the Draper had seen a light on at the stables. We'll bring the map back over here. So Friday night, the Draper had seen the light on at the stables. The butcher had seen the man holding the door opened at the stables. And the woman, Eliza Kendall, had heard movement, sounds, and work happening at the stables. And people had seen either who they can confirm as Barrett or a man matching Barrett's description on early hours of Saturday morning. Okay, so I might as well keep this here just for a few minutes. Teresa Lindley sees Barrett leaving his home at the same time she's leaving her home. So that's right in here because she's a neighbor. And she thinks this is unusual. She's leaving at 5:30 a.m. and she knows he usually doesn't leave until about 6:30 a.m. So she thinks it's unusual that he's leaving at the same time. She kind of walks behind him as they get up here to Manningham Lane, and she goes this way to Aspley Crescent, and she sees him going this way to Bellevue Stables. Lizzie Jefferson works as a servant in a house by the Bellevue Stables, and at 6 a.m. she hears hammering and whistling and sees a light on in the stables, and she finds that very unusual because there's usually nobody there till 7. Now this next witness is John Thomas Dyer. He is what back then they would refer to as somebody who is simple and slow. So, unfortunately, his testimony isn't given as much credibility as it should be. I think that he was credible in what he's saying here. He knows William Barrett. They are friends. He is, familiar with him. They have a familiar greeting. It's, something like, hallelujah, the Lord is great, or something, and one says it and the other one will say it back. So, he sees William Barrett exiting the Bellevue Stables, carrying a cumbersome bundle of clothes at about 6:20, and he says hello in his religious greeting to Barrett, and Barrett doesn't say it back. Barrett doesn't acknowledge him. Barrett doesn't look at him or say hello, and this kind of hurt John Dyer's feelings because he thought that Barrett was angry with him, so he was worried he had done something to anger Barrett. Next, we have a woman visiting her aunt from out of town, and her aunt lives on Thorncliffe Road, and she left home about 6:30, and she sees William Barrett, she says, about 12 yards from the butcher shop, so somewhere in this area right here, carrying a bundle of clothes. And, you know, she continues walking. She's not really paying that much attention to what he's doing, so she just continues walking. At 6:30 a.m. that morning, Saturday morning, Thomas Gill is in his kitchen, and he sees Barrett approach from the opposite direction he normally approaches from. So, you know, I cannot confirm on which side of the road the Gills lived here. So whichever way Barrett walked up, it was from the direction of Mellor Street and not the direction of Bateman Street. So, you know, it's very obvious that he probably lived here, and he says that Barrett usually came from the left, which would be if they live here and the kitchen window faces out this way. But this morning, Barrett came from the right. He came from Mellor Street at about an hour earlier than he normally comes by in the morning for Johnny, or has been coming by to see if Johnny was found yet. He comes by at 6:30 and asks, of course, is Johnny home? Thomas tells him no. Barrett leaves. And supposedly he goes straight to work. Now, if he left the Gill home and went straight to work, it should have taken him about 5 to 10 minutes, no more. So he should have arrived here at about 6:35 to 6:40, but he did not arrive to work until 7. And then, so 7 a.m. Saturday morning brings us to when Johnny's body is being discovered. And that testimony and several other witnesses is enough to come back on this particular trial to a guilty verdict. Now, remember, Barrett is not at this trial. He is in Connolly, closer to Leeds, and living with his family. But this verdict is enough to get a new arrest warrant for him, and so the constable and several other policemen go hop on the train to go to Connolly to re-arrest Barrett for the murder of Johnny Gill. When they get there, you know, his parents are pretty pissed off, his wife is mad, Barrett's mad, and there's a few locals, little drunken fellas from a local tavern nearby that kind of give the police some shit about it, but, you know, they're able to quell that pretty quickly and take Willie into custody, and he is held in custody in Leeds inside of a old, like, it's an old medieval fortress that's been converted into a very uncomfortable jail. So he's not even being held in Bradford anymore. But, you know, this next part is going to go on pretty long. You know, Craven is still representing Barrett, so he can, you know, continue as this goes on. But this is sort of racking up the legal bills, and it's going beyond what Wolfenden can pay for. And so they're going to start trying to raise money for Barrett's legal defense, and they will raise some. I don't know. It's never said if they fully raised enough, but, and they'll do more fundraising later, but anyway, this takes Barrett by surprise, because I guess he thought he was probably done with this whole ordeal, and now here he is back in of jail again and waiting another trial. And there will be a few more pre-trial hearings and all of that as the weeks go on, until finally they will have the actual here we go, in it to win it trial. And it's going to be a lot of the same testimony as before, the same people, the same evidence given. It's going to be a rehashing of all the other smaller trials we've had. Only this one, I think, is open to the public, so there's a lot more people there present, and it's still quite the media circus, because by now, the police and the press have been getting letters from weirdos saying they are Jack the Ripper, or that Jack the Ripper did this, and poor Barrett is being framed, and of course Jack the Ripper did this, and that whole super mess of everything that's going on, all because of people desperately wanting this to be Jack the Ripper crimes, because they can make money off of it, tourists and whatnot, because even in its contemporary time, it was a sensation. People are still fascinated with it today, but even back then they were pretty worked up about it, and a lot of people really wanted this case to be linked to Jack the Ripper, and I'm telling you, it wasn't. There's some weird things that I think were kind of forced by other people, weird letters and stuff like that, but I don't think it really had anything to do with any of it. Alright, what color should we do the owl? I've been saving him. I don't want to do a normal brown. I don't know. Let's see about some layers of purple. Yeah, purple owl. So the trial is going to start, and we're going to go through the timeline. The things that Willie say versus what other people say as far as his whereabouts go. We're going to go through other police testifying about what they found during their investigation. We're going to go through the doctors. At least 3 different doctors viewed Johnny's body, and so they're all going to give testimony as to what they believe happened to Johnny, and they all pretty much agree on the same stuff, so we don't have to get back into that. And some of them sort of speculate on who could have done this and what type of person, and I mean, back then they think that it was some crazy maniac, not somebody cool and calm and put together like William Barrett. Well, the doctors aren't saying that, but that's what the media wants to think and everything. The doctors speculate more on Johnny's wounds than they do on the perpetrator and everything. So once they get through the testimony, this is on March 11th and March 12th of 1889. And they're going to go through all of this testimony, and hold on to your butts, ladies and gentlemen, because they are going to come back with a verdict of not guilty. William Barrett is not guilty. He is set free right then and there. There are cheers in the courtroom and outside once that verdict is heard. Johnny's family is absolutely crushed, of course. Withers is crushed. The prosecution is crushed, and anybody who actually believed that Barrett did this is very upset. Um, kind of shell-shocked a lot of people. They couldn't believe that he was free to go. And that was essentially it as far as Barrett goes and this case. So he would immediately, like I said, go try to do some more fundraising. He had a $500 or £500, excuse me, legal bill to pay, and £500 back then was basically, I didn't convert it, like thousands and thousands of dollars today. So it would have been a very hefty bill. And they would go, Wolfenden and a few other hardcore supporters would basically take Barrett around for speaking engagements and things like that to raise funds. And half the time, or more than half the time, most of the time, when it was time for Barrett to get up and speak, he just wouldn't. And then they would have to say that, oh, he was so overwhelmed by the support and affection that he just couldn't even talk, you know, which, how convenient. You're so overwhelmed with support you can't even talk. Now, I know in one town they only raised like £11, so this didn't seem to work well. Some people were willing to give away their money, but a lot of his supporters probably just didn't have the money to give. So they, you know, showed up and checked out the spectacle, but they didn't have any money to give him. So, you know, he eventually, things died down, and, you know, Bradford kind of moved on and went back to normal. Barrett continued living in Canonnelly. He wouldn't move back to Bradford at all, but he would go on to somehow eventually earn the money to buy a farm, and then he would become a farm bailiff, which, for somebody that started out as just a, you know, lowly milkman, to eventually own his own farm, and then become farm bailiff, that's quite a leap. And it lends another, you know, straw in the pile of his unusual connections to people that can prosper him and help him. Very strange. But, you know, he would never be in any, like, trouble again. But I think if he did this again, and I do think he did, he just learned to maybe not leave the body out in the open, or not be the last person seen with the victim. I don't know. It's amazing that he got away with this, and I don't think he would in this era of forensics and things like that. But who knows? Maybe he didn't do it, and somebody else did, and they did just an excellent job of framing Barrett for it. But, you know, his own actions tell me that he definitely was involved and knew more than he ever said. But, you know, there were never any, like, deathbed confessions from him or his wife or anything like that saying that he had actually done it. And as far as I can tell, nothing from Wolfenden either. So, who knows? Let me kind of skip to the end here. We'll talk about the Gill family, and then we'll move on to some of the Jack the Ripper stuff. So, Johnny's sisters would grow up and get married and kind of lead a normal life. Their little brother Samuel would become a butcher and kind of have just a normal life as well. Pretty plain, nothing too exciting or anything. Thankfully, no more tragedies like the one that happened to their brother. Thomas Gill will die in November of 1909, at age 54, and Marianne dies in 1932 in June at age 76. Um, and that's kind of what happened to them. I believe Thomas and Marianne were both buried next to Johnny in Wind Hill Cemetery in Bradford. And, you know, they never got justice for their son. They had to deal with the media ridicule, and it's just a nightmare. They had to live for the rest of their lives knowing what had happened to him, how horrific and brutal that was, and they got no justice for it, none. And that was just how they had to continue. It said that, you know, it kind of closed off Thomas and Marianne for the rest of their lives. They, you know, didn't express much joy, which is so sad. You know, I hope they did find other moments of joy in their lives through their other children and their, you know, grandchildren and things like that. But poor Thomas, you know, he didn't live too much longer afterwards anyway. So, you know, that's what happened. Barrett got a farm and became a farm bailiff and did pretty well for himself, and the Gills suffered on with no justice and no resolution. And it seems incredibly unfair. So that will bring us around to the Ripper theories. Now, as I said before, there's plenty of people that still think that Jack the Ripper was the one. There was an incident in a house on Wednesday before Johnny went missing where someone had broke into the house of the Cahills while they were out for a night at the opera or something, theater or something like that. And when they got home, they noticed their house had been broken into, and at first they thought there was a body hanging in one of the parlor rooms or something, but whenever they, you know, got a light on in there, they realized it was just one of the Mrs. Cahill's dresses had been hung up and was kind of flapping around. I mean, it scared the shit out of them. That would scare the shit out of me too. But, you know, Mrs. Cahill, it said that she never went back in that house again. They sold it and never went back in that house again. But there was some kind of note left behind saying that he would destroy a youth. So people point to that and say that that was Jack the Ripper breaking in. Some people say it was Barrett breaking in. Who knows? I don't really see much connection between the two, other than I do think the person who killed Johnny did have, even if they didn't have like a certain fascination with Jack the Ripper, they were keeping up with the Ripper news. And it is said that Barrett was fascinated with the murders and would talk about them often with anybody who would discuss them with him. So that's a common thread in murderers, especially serial murderers, that they often admire the work of other killers and are, you know, prone to trying to copy them in some ways, to emulate them and things like that. So some of the stuff that seems linked to Jack the Ripper may really just be fanboy stuff, like the intestines being wrapped around his neck and all that. Well, I think that was in the papers, and that would definitely be a way to, like, you know, for one dude to think he's sending a little message or a nod to another one, you know. Oh, look at what I did. Oh, Jack, I dedicate this to you. Yeah, losers, idiots. I'm sorry, I don't fetishize serial killers. I think they're all, you know, really, like, horrible and lame. But, you know, other people out there do, and they do like them, and They do stupid things for them, thinking they'll get attention or whatever. I don't know. That's my theory. So let me get to some of the differences between the Whitechapel murders and the Johnny Gill murder. I actually have some here. There they are. Alright, so first of all, and the most obvious, is going to be the victimology. You know, the Whitechapel murders are all grown women who were supposedly prostitutes. I think that that's just been distorted in the news throughout the decades, and there's pretty good evidence nowadays pointing to the fact that some of these women probably were not prostitutes. They might have been working girls in the sense that they had jobs and went to work. Of course, whether they were or weren't prostitutes is really irrelevant. They wouldn't have deserved what happened to them regardless, but they think there's a theory that, you know, to quell public concern, they said the girls were prostitutes so that they didn't have a public panic on their hand with, women worried for their safety, which is kind of shitty if you ask me. But even if you do have somebody out there killing prostitutes, because it does happen, they should be warned too. Anyway, I mean, if there was a reason to panic, let people know so they can panic and panic accordingly. So yeah, victimology. You got grown women here and a 7-year-old little boy. Very different. Just the MO in general. Jack the Ripper was said to be quite skilled and seemed to know what he was doing when doing the cutting and everything. So they suspected maybe a butcher or a surgeon, a doctor, or something like that. The person who mutilated Johnny was not skilled. The cuts were very crude. Some of the organs were torn out instead of cut out. There was very much more of a chopping effect going on than a surgical removal of the limbs and things like that. I think the one thing that people point to and say, oh, Jack the Ripper, is really the intestines thing. And that's really the only thing that they have in common. I mean, there's of course the evisceration and the removal of the sex organs, which could also be a little bit of copying or a nod to Jack the Ripper, but the person who mutilated Johnny was in no way skilled, and this was probably their first time. Or if it had been before, maybe they did it on animals and hadn't done it on a human before. I don't know, but that seems off because, you know, with the Jack the Ripper crimes already happening, he's not going to suddenly, even if he's going to switch up his victimology, which I don't think he would, he's not going to suddenly switch up his skill level and just go back to rudimentary. Clearly, I think with Jack the Ripper, whoever he was very proud of himself, and he loved to show off his abilities. And whoever killed Johnny was in a hurry and was unskilled, and yes, may have been trying to emulate Jack the Ripper, but they didn't really know how. So that's why I think that they're two different people. Another reason is Johnny was taken somewhere and held somewhere for an amount of time, whereas the victims of Jack the Ripper were, you know, if they were drug off, excuse me, it was not that far away. You know, they were attacked and mutilated right there on the street, whereas Johnny was clearly held somewhere for some amount of time and drained and cleaned and dismembered and then kind of reassembled with the braces and dropped there in front of the coach house doors. Somewhere that, you know, whoever dropped him there, Barrett, knew absolutely he would be found within minutes. You know, this is a very busy area. People are getting to work and getting up and going early. So he knew damn well that he might have even known Joseph Burke was going to go out there and muck the stables. So, oh, sorry, there goes a dog hacking behind me. It's terrible. I'm sorry. So, you know, Barrett probably knew a lot of the neighborhood routines. He probably had seen Burke mucking out the stables before, and he would have been up and moving around in the neighborhood about this time on a daily basis, so he would know the routines. And he definitely wanted Johnny's body to be found right away. I think the pressure of them looking for Johnny was starting to get to him a little bit, so I think he was in a hurry. I don't know. Let me look at this for a minute and decide what I want to do with the colors. What do we want to add next? I might go in over the top with some green. It depends on how much longer I have to talk here. So, you know, when you look at the crimes a little closer, you can see that there are a lot of differences between the Whitechapel murders and the Johnny Gill murder that just don't add up. Like I said, they got some letters from some yahoos saying that they were Jack the Ripper and that they had killed Johnny Gill, but it was just probably a hoax, like so many of the other Jack the Ripper letters were. I know there's some people that think there's one legitimate letter that claims responsibility for Johnny that was supposedly from Jack the Ripper, but I don't know. I still don't believe it. I just don't believe Jack the Ripper had anything to do with this. I do, however, believe that the killer was fascinated with Jack the Ripper and wanted to impress him. And I mean, we'll never know if Jack the Ripper was impressed or not, or was he mad? Did he feel threatened that somebody was trying to outshine him or whatever? And so many other yahoos were taking responsibility for it in Jack the Ripper's name. We'll never know. But that's just my speculation, is that whoever did this was not Jack the Ripper, just a groupie, just a fan. Definitely probably had all of the classic signs of, you know, somebody who's going to show that kind of violence towards children. Now, I don't actually, you know, who knows what Barrett actually turned out to be, but I think that he kept doing this. Sorry, I grabbed the wrong color. I think that he probably had more victims. I think he probably just chose a little wiser and didn't pick victims with somebody that would miss them. I think he probably chose like homeless children off the street and things like that, so that he wouldn't have to deal with another investigation again, because that was a little close and he barely made it. So that's the case, and that's why I feel like Willie Barrett probably did do it. I don't think it was Jack the Ripper. I think that that was just a convenient kind of moment in history being taken advantage of. And I'm sure lots of murders in England at the time were pinned on Jack the Ripper that had nothing to do with him. And then there were some that weren't and that he is responsible for. That we don't know. But I really hope that you enjoyed going through all this with me. I enjoyed doing it for you. I'm going to try and get on a schedule where I can do, hopefully, at first 2 videos a month until I eventually get up to where I can do 1 a week. I have a full-time job. I work over like 40 to 50 hours a week, so I really only do this on my days off. And and since I'm learning everything still, I'm moving a lot slower than hopefully what I will in the future when I kind of get everything down and learn what I'm doing a little better and can produce a little higher quality for you guys. But if you have any theories about the Johnny Gill case, hit me up in the comments. Let me know. We'll talk about it. If you have any questions or anything else, just let me know in the comments. I would love it if you subscribed, gave me any likes or shares, subscribes. I will take anything, even a little, thumbs up, which I guess is a like. I already said that, but, you know, the art definitely is going to get weirder and everything. I did kind of a lighter piece because this was such a heavy story. Hopefully the art also improves over time too, as well as everything else. I know there's a lot to be desired, but I promise I'm practicing and working on it. And if you'll stick with me, I promise everything will get better, from the video quality when I get a new camera to my narrating skills to hopefully my art skills. And so let me know down below what you think. And I appreciate you watching. Hope to see you next time. Bye, everybody.